Okay, I want to discuss the various openings for e4, king pawn openings, just in general. I want to say that this first move is sort of saying what is your general strategy, and maybe most people don't know what this move actually means or what the strategy actually is. And here's what it is when you play this opening. Well, king pawn openings, e4, are generally open games, and I covered that term in my last lecture, meaning there's usually a lot of open lines and files, and there's a lot of active play, meaning pieces are sort of mobile, and it tends to be a slug-it-out type game. Okay, so if you like very attacking games and things like that, usually the king pawn openings e4 lead to this. And why does a person play e4? Well, they play e4, it's accomplishing sort of three things, even though I listed two. One, it's controlling, you move the center pawn and it controls this square d5. And the other thing is it lets the queen out for development, and it lets this bishop out for development. Remember the three principles, the opening were to control the center, and develop your pieces, and castle. Well, this is accomplishing two things. It's controlling the center square, and it's going to allow us to mobilize the queen and the bishop, because they can't mobilize until we move a pawn. And then if you don't know, when you do this move, generally white has three goals, or these goals in mind: rapid development, controlling the center, which is sort of just the opening principles. They want to play d4 as soon as possible, or when possible, and they want to quickly castle and attack the enemy king, usually on the king side. So that's the thing. And as remember, I said these are slug it out. So e4 is really, I'm going to get everything out quickly as possible and attack you. Okay, and if you don't know, now so black now has to respond, and black's first move, which I covered the most commonly played moves, also says something about its philosophy. So if white is saying, I'm going to get all my pieces out and kill you, black now is going to play a move that sort of says how it says, well, if you're going to do that, here's my plan to stop you. So here's I'm just going to scroll down. Oh, here, let me pause real quick. Okay, I was just getting ahead of my lecture notes. So black has one of these four philosophies against your goal. Is that one is to fight equally in the center for control and development. Two is to give up something for something. Three, and I'll cover that a little bit more in detail. Three is to attack from the side. So it says, well, I'm not going to go in the center and attack you. I'm going to attack you from the side. And four is to say, I'm going to neutralize that e4 pawn right away. So what are these openings? Okay, well, let's just cover these philosophies by black. Okay. Okay, I corrected my lecture notes. And remember, the first response by black would be, hey, I'm going to fight equally in the center of control for center, or fight equally in the center with you. That response by black is going to be this e5. That's black is saying, I'm going to fight equally in the center, and this leads to all different types of games. I noted here to the Ruy Lopez and to the Italian game. I'm going to cover all these openings, or most of these openings, in more detail later. But e5 leads to black saying, I'm going to fight toe for toe for you, or with you. Okay, so so this would be sort of a natural continuation. This would be the Ruy Lopez. Okay, and actually if white played this one, it would be the Italian game. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, these three responses by black, c5, e6, and c6, are saying, you know what, I'm going to give up something for something else. So notice how all these they're giving up something for something else. If black plays c5, it's saying, hey, when you play d4, which was one of the objectives of white, I'm going to take that pawn. And what I'm giving up and what I'm getting in return is, black is saying, I'm going to keep a central pawn majority, meaning I'm going to have two central pawns, which will help control the center. But I'm going to give you a lead in development. Remember, the principles of the opening were center control, development, and castling. So what black is saying is, I'm going to have more center control, but I'm going to allow you to develop. So that's backing up. So when black plays this move, this Sicilian, that's what he's saying. He says, you're eventually going to trade off this pawn like this. and I'm going to have the two center pawns, but you're going to get more mobility. And if you actually watch my last lecture, you'd actually see all these lines were much better for white. It had more mobility of the pieces than the black did, okay? Okay, for the next one, e6, what black is saying is that, hey, I'm going to keep a pawn in the center, so some central control, but I'm going to give black a space advantage, and I covered what a space advantage was last time, meaning sort of, this means black will get to keep some central control, but it's going to lack some mobility of its pieces. Okay, so the French defense, so e6, remember, and then the most common moves are d4, and then this is the French defense, and then maybe one of the continuations could be what's called the advanced variation. And notice how black gets to keep its central pawn, but it's lacking some mobility of its pieces. It's going to have a hard time, especially on this side. You know, white has definitely a space advantage over in this area, so that's what it gets. Black gets to keep a pawn, but it loses some control of territory. Okay, the next one is c6, which is also known as, I would say the previous one was known as the French defense, if I didn't say that. The next one, c6, is actually known as the Caro-Kann. And here black says, remember these three were sort of, I'm going to give something up, but get something else. So the third one is, it's going to trade a center pawn for black, then gets to develop. So it's going to be lacking, so it's going to give up some central control for development. Now notice the last time, the French defense is I get central control for space, which is maybe some mobility. Okay, so what does the Caro-Kann look like? So here's, so remember c6, then the most common moves would be d4, d5, knight c3, and then black takes, and then white takes. So black is going to be able to develop its pieces somewhat naturally, and then, or to the natural squares, which we discussed in a previous lecture. But white sort of gets this central control. Okay, so giving up something for something else. Or let's move on to the black's next response. So the next philosophy is sort of saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you the center, but I'm going to attack you from the side, from the flank. Okay, and these three moves, d6, knight f6, and g6, which are actually known as, d6 is known as the Pyrrhic, f6 is the Alekhine defense, and then g6 is known as the modern defense. Not that there's really anything modern about it. I think it was developed in the 1920s. So basically it's going to say, you get the center, but I'm going to develop and attack you from the side. So here's what a normal game might look like. Whoops, I was already there. e4, of course, g6, I'm going to use g6 as an example, but you could probably play d6 in this situation and come up with a very similar looking opening. And then white would normally respond by d4, bishop g7. Notice this is what I mean by attacking from the flank. Notice now this bishop is attacking these two central squares from the side of the board. And white would probably play this, and then d6. So notice that you could actually play d6 and sort of play d6 and then push this pawn and push the bishop out, and you come up with a very similar position. Okay, now black's just going to say, I'm going to attack it. You got this nice center. And the real theory is that, technically white controls these two squares, but a piece never really controls the square that's on, so technically those pawns don't really control those two squares, they control these two squares. So let's go to our last philosophy. Our last philosophy is to sort of counterattack and neutralize e4. That's by playing d5, which is known as the center counter, or the Scandinavian defense. So basically black plays this move, and then white's going to take immediately, and then normally the queen takes, and then the knight will come out and attack the queen. So actually you get to develop the knight for free, sort of, because it attacks the queen. The queen usually goes here, and then black sort of plays in this manner. Now notice that black's going to be able to get its pieces out somewhat naturally. The only thing is that the black queen is somewhat in an unusual spot. could do is, though, is after it takes, there's also a line which goes like this, which I probably would prefer. And then usually white's going to play this, you're going to take, things like that. Okay? So that's a quick overview of e4. e4 says, hey, I'm going to get all my pieces out and quickly attack you, and then black can basically respond by saying, okay, I'm going to fight for you toe-to-toe, or give up something for something else, or fight from the flank, or counterattack. Or we'll go with these